When a pro athlete gets hurt, we see a lot of outcrying on social media about how they would donate their respective body part to try and help that athlete heal. And in the case of Lonzo Ball, someone did actually donate their meniscus. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to teach you about the medical side of the sports world. And we're going to be talking today about this honestly pretty shocking revelation, but nice to hear the honesty and truth here from Lonzo Ball about how he received a meniscus transplant. This was on his WAE podcast, where he gave details today for the first time that he actually underwent a meniscus transplant. We're going to listen to it, react, and talk about what exactly that means and if this provides any more hope in my mind for Zoe's future in the NBA.
To make a long story short, ultimately, it started with a meniscus tear. Basically started on the Lakers when I tore it the first time. Tore it a couple more times to a point to where there was no more, basically not much meniscus left and bone on bone.
This is a really important point that we talk about with the difference with a meniscus tear and how it's managed surgically. There's a meniscus resection called a meniscectomy, or there is meniscus repair. And so whenever you hear an athlete just had their meniscus fixed, you really have to ask more detail about, was the meniscus removed or was the meniscus repaired? In a meniscectomy, the doctors go in and the surgeons cut out the torn part of the tissue. So if you think of having a little hangnail on your finger, with a meniscectomy, they go in and they cut that hangnail out. The challenge is that, yes, you get rid of that irritating tissue, but if you do that multiple times or you have a big enough tear, eventually you remove that meniscus tissue to a point where you affect its ability to cushion and stabilize the knee. So it's ideal to be able to repair, sew up the meniscus, but in some cases, there's no real other option, or the athlete chooses to undergo a meniscectomy where the meniscus is cut out. So it sounds like Lonzo had multiple surgeries with meniscectomies where they had to take out more and more meniscus. And eventually you lose enough real estate that you lose that ability of the meniscus to cushion and do its job. So important point number one with the injury.
Left and bone on bone was rubbing. So the cartilage was gone and the bone was messed.
This develops then either from osteoarthritis as we get older and age, that cartilage starts to wear away, but also when that meniscus has lost its cushioning ability, its ability to stabilize the joint, adequately distribute the load, you get progressive stress on the bone, stress on the cartilage, and then subsequent wear and loss of that cartilage. And also when they go in and do these surgeries to clean up or cut out part of the meniscus, they often will shave down any frayed or irritated parts of the cartilage. And so you can also lose more cartilage through that route, eventually leading to a very painful arthritic knee.
So I had to get actually a new meniscus from a donor. I had to get a bone allograft, and I had to get some new cartilage put in as well.
Now we're going to walk through all of those, what it means to transplant a meniscus, if you can actually donate your meniscus to a pro athlete someday, and then just the implications on Lonzo trying to return to basketball. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. Today's video is sponsored by Bombas. Bombas is a comfort-focused premium basics brand with a mission centered around helping others. Simply put, these are the most comfortable socks I have ever worn, and their whole business is centered around this idea of helping others, with one purchased equaling one donated. I really like this little blister guard in the back because I love playing golf and I really hate when my shoes rub, so this really keeps that nice and protected. They've got a nice little built-in arch support, and they're just really nice and durable, with a bonus having this seamless design where you don't get that seam that sort of irritates and rubs into your toes. As a viewer of my channel, Bombas has the hookup for you. If you head to bombas.com/BrianS, use code BrianS at checkout, you're going to get 20% off your first purchase, or click the link down in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. And maybe you're not just looking for yourself. Bombas also has some really nice little kid socks, which my wife and I love. They've got these nice little grippies on the bottom of them, so my son can run around the house and not worry about slipping and falling, and also know he's got some great quality socks. Every purchase is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, and you can also know you're helping others, with one purchased equaling one donated by the great folks over at Bombas. Again, that's code BrianS. Scan the QR code, get 20% off your first purchase with Bombas. Thank you again to Bombas for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. Here with our biodigital anatomy tool, I've shown the main ligaments and, of course, the menisci within the knee. So looking at a right knee here, this is going to be the LCL. We'll hide that and get it out of the way. We're then going to have the MCL on the inside, deep inside the knee, ACL on the backside, the PCL, and there we see the femur and the tibia. Of course, we have two menisci. There's a medial on the inner portion, and there's a lateral on the outer portion. And really, the job of the meniscus, yes, we talk about it like a shock absorber. That's a very simplistic way of thinking about it. If you look at the normal contour of the femur, right? The femur is nice and round, and the tibia, the shin, is flat. If you didn't have the meniscus in here, your point of contact would be a single spot where the curved surface of the femur contacts the tibia. This high amount of force is distributed over a very small area, which leads to a high pressure, high contact pressure. The meniscus, because it makes contact over a wider area, takes this big force from running, jumping our body weight, distributes it over a wider spread area to make lower contact forces. Now, let's say you go in one year, you have a meniscectomy that takes out this portion. The next year you take out this portion. Before you know it, you've taken out all this meniscus and you've lost that ability to distribute those forces. The cartilage starts to wear away. And unfortunately, you can end up with a knee that looks something like this, where we see all these little kind of potholes. We see thinning of this cartilage. We see bone spurs. You see the joint space is narrowed. And so this is an exaggeration for a picture, but this is essentially what you would think of happening with somebody's knee like Lonzo, where you've had all of this damage. Now, Lonzo mentioned he had to have some cartilage transplant, and we knew about that. We talked about that in previous videos. Whenever you talk about transplanting or taking a meniscus from a donor and putting it in a new knee, part of the qualifications for that surgery depend on how much arthritis you have and how much joint space is left. Most of these patients have areas of full thickness loss of the cartilage, and if you don't address that cartilage, you're not going to have a successful good outcome because the cartilage loss is still going to cause pain. So that first surgery that we heard about with Lonzo, the cartilage transplant, is going to go in and transplant some bone, transplant some cartilage to basically try and fill in all these little defects and gaps that he might have had throughout his knee. And these can be widespread, these can be solitary and focal, but the transplant for the cartilage was going to be to try and fill in, replace some of the surface cartilage. Now, for the meniscus transplant, number one, he called it an allograft. An allograft means it's from the same species, so it's from a human, but it's from another human. An autograft means it's from your own body. So the meniscus that's in Lonzo Ball's knee is from another person, and most likely that other person has passed away. So whenever somebody passes away, the same way that they can donate their organs, you can donate your soft tissues. And so most likely, most of these cases of transplanted meniscus are going to come from a deceased donor where they have a nice healthy meniscus. And if we remove the femur here, the menisci are anchored into the bone at these spots called the roots. So there's a root that sits right here in the front, a root in the back, and then same on that medial meniscus. There's a couple of different ways that they'll technically do a meniscus transplant surgery. One where they just take the meniscus out of the donor tissue and they just sew it into the new knee. The other way that you can do it is you can take a chunk of bone where the meniscus is anchored into the bone, and then you insert those bone plugs into the bone of the recipient knee like Lonzo. But yes, literally, they took a knee from a person who had, again, most likely been deceased. They cut out the meniscus, they took the meniscus into the OR, they opened up Lonzo's knee, and they stuck that donor meniscus into his knee to do literally just that, a meniscus transplant. So it's like an organ transplant. You're just transplanting that meniscus to try and restore that mechanical property, try and restore that weight distribution, that load distribution inside of his joint. So to answer that question, yes, you theoretically can donate your meniscus to an athlete if they have an injury. But again, you need your meniscus. And so the only time that happens is either if somebody unfortunately passes away and is an organ donor, or sometimes these tissues can be donated in somebody who has like a knee replacement where that's going to be removed. Those are other circumstances where a living donor might have donated some cartilage or some bone tissue for an orthopedic procedure. But most of the time, you're not going to be able to donate your meniscus or would donate your meniscus to an NBA player unless you pass away. The big discussion point here this whole time has been on the impact of Lonzo's career. And I will be honest, at this point, I would still be very, very surprised. Not if he comes back, but I would be surprised if he comes back and excels at the level he was previously for an extended period of time. And I know that's a lot of qualifications here. If we just look at kind of the overall data in terms of like return to sport, a lot of athletes who undergo a meniscus transplant will return to sport. If you look at all the meta-analyses, systematic reviews, a high percentage will return to sport. This is a systematic review meta-analysis that was published in 2019 that looked at a lot of different studies of athletes, some just recreational, some high level, and their overall return to sports. And you can see what they found here, a majority, 77% of athletes and physically active patients were able to return to sport. More importantly, 2/3 were able to perform at pre-injury levels, because at this point, it's not just can you get back to your sport, but are you back to your sport in a way that you're happy for what you were doing before? Now, fairly decent percentage, 13% in terms of reoperations, while some patients unfortunately went on to have a total knee replacement. Obviously, there's a wide range of skill level, sport level here, but just gives you a rough sense that this isn't like a guarantee that you're going to get back. And also, the more demand that you have on your joint from playing a high level sport, it's going to be easier for me to get back to golfing than it will be an NBA player to get back to running, jumping, dunking, and playing a competitive 82 game season for a number of multiple years. So at this point with Lonzo, this is just a sign that there was even more extensive trauma and surgery done to his knee than we initially expected. It wasn't just a cartilage transplant, which in and of itself is a big major operation. It was also a meniscus transplant, which is an equally big operation. So you've got two big operations together that make it even harder to come back from. Impossible? No. But I think at this point, you have to be honest with your athlete and with your expectations of you're just hoping to get people back physically active. Yes, the goal is to be back at an NBA level, but in reality, the true successful outcome is going to be, can you get back to playing basketball at all? The big unknown is, can you get back to basketball at the level you were at? And that's the part that I'm still doubtful of. And I think it's reasonable to have that level of skepticism just based on the data, what we've seen before, and trying to have realistic expectations. Do I think he'll try and come back? Yeah, I think he's going to obviously try and come back. I think he gets back to some degree, but I don't have high expectations that he'll be the Lonzo that we saw before. And if he is, that it will be for more than just a few years or a couple of years. I hope so. But I think the reality is that we can't put that pressure on him to expect that that's what it's going to look like. So something we've never talked about on this channel, meniscus transplants. Yes, they can be done. You can get a transplant. There's a lot of decision making that goes into that in terms of patient qualification, matching the size. Obviously, it is a very, very complex area of orthopedic sports medicine that not even all orthopedic sports medicine surgeons are going to be doing and are trained to do. So it's not as simple. If you have a meniscus tear, don't go to your doctor tomorrow and say, hey, I heard you, I can have a meniscus transplant. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and it's not as simple as just saying you're going to do one. But yes, it can be done, and as we've learned here, was done with Lonzo. Thanks as always for watching. Let me know any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later.